My name is Mark LaFramboise. I'm the book buyer here at the store, and on behalf of our staff and our owners, it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. And it's an honor to welcome Richard Ford back to Politics in Prose. He's the author of the award-winning novels featuring the inimitable hero Frank Bascombe, the Sportswriter, Independence Day, and Lay of the Land, as well as many other great novels. His recent novel, Canada, was awarded the Prix Féminin Étranger, which I think means the best book not written in France. What's that? Weird. Okay, good. There you go. And the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. He's also the recipient of the Rhea Award for the short story for outstanding achievement in that genre, and author of story collections including Rock Springs, Women with Men, and A Multitude of Sins. And let me be frank with you, we're once again treated to the wry observations and the unique humanity and compassion that is Frank Bascombe navigating the wreckage of post-Superstorm Sandy, New Jersey. In the 4 stories that combine to tell the story, Frank confronts and muses upon a variety of subjects, including race, marriage, aging, and death, often homing in on the most absurd, hilarious, and relevant parts of all of those not very hilarious things. Whether in the novels that will outlive us all or in this new group of stories, it's a refreshing and welcome pleasure to spend time with Frank Bascombe, and for that we owe thanks to Richard Ford. Thanks for coming, and help me welcome Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Thanks for coming tonight. I know you all think it's cold in Washington. No, I live in Maine. This ain't cold. And thank you for coming and supporting this precious bookstore. I really know how central to the lives of this community this bookstore is, and how much it means to you for it to survive. And certainly, if it weren't for this bookstore, I wouldn't be alive at all as a writer. So all of us who are trying to write books the best we can, owe so much to Mark and to his colleagues in the independent book selling business. Well, Mark told you all I need to tell you, but I sort of want to read one little passage out of this book, which I'll explain after I read it. These are 4 stories, and the first of these stories is about Frank Bascombe going to see a house that has been destroyed by the hurricane. And it's a house that he used to own and that he sold to another person. And when the house gets carried away by the hurricane over on the Jersey Shore, his friend who bought the house calls him up and says, "Come over here and do something." Which is what happens to realtors all the time. And probably many of you have felt that way yourself. Something's wrong with my house, why don't you come over and fix it? But Frank is 68 years old, and as he goes over to the shore to see this man, and he's waiting for this guy to show up. So I'll read you this little passage. "I've struggled out of my car, tossed my gum, and am instantly cold, my ribs especially, as if I wasn't wearing a shirt under my jacket. The leavening effects of the Gulf Stream are, of course, bullshit. I'm only wearing an old Beans Newburyport, chinos and deck shoes, at-home attire for the suburban retiree, not yet come fully to grips with reality. I'm also concerned about stepping on a nail, and because of something my wife Sally said, I feel the need to move to more consciously pick my feet up when I walk. The Gramps shuffle being the unmaskable final journey approach signal. It'll also keep me from falling down and busting my ass." What is it about falling? He died of a fall. The poor thing never recovered after his fall. He broke his hip in a fall, and it was never the same. Death came relatively quickly after a fall in the backyard. How fucking far do these people fall? Off of buildings? Over spuming cataracts down manholes? Is it farther to the ground than it used to be? In years gone by, I'd fall on the ice, hop back up, and never think a thought. Now it's a death sentence. What my wife said to me was, "Be careful when you go down those front steps, sweetheart. The surface isn't regular, so pick your feet up." Why am I now a walking accident waiting to happen? Why am I more worried about that than whether there's an afterlife? So I wrote this about 2 years ago. So I was in Washington last weekend to do an event for the wonderful lab school, which I hope you all know about. And if you don't know about it, I wish you would know more about it. It's a wonderful institution for children and young people with learning differences, such as I. Not young, but learning differences. And so I had to do a BBC thing the next morning, and I went over to M Street. And I did the BBC event. And I came out feeling pretty good about it because I hadn't done anything horrible. So I went across the street, had breakfast, came back to my hotel to wait for my car, and I fell down in the middle of M Street. I fell flat on my face. I was carrying a lot of heavy bags and stuff and fell just literally kaflooey right in the middle of traffic. And just it was horrible. But I thought to myself, you are onto something. You know, when you fall down like that, it's supposed to be horrible. I had a cancer operation a few years ago, which turned out not to be cancer, but when they told me I had lymphoma, I thought, this is really interesting. Nobody's ever told me I had that before. And when I fell down in the middle of M Street at 8:30 in the morning, I thought, this is really interesting. It hurts, it scarred up my hands, but it was really interesting to fall down in the middle of traffic. You have to take command of these things. I'm going to read you the beginning of the story from which this little pathetic excerpt was extracted. These stories take place just before Christmas in 2012 in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy near Seacliff, a town I made up on the Jersey Shore, which is more or less right across the bridge from Tom's River. In what normally people would call Seaside Heights or Seaside Park, all of which was just completely flattened by the hurricane. Strange fragrances ride the twitchy, wintry air at the shore this morning, 2 weeks before Christmas. Flowery wreaths on an ominous sea stir expectancy in the unwary. It is, of course, the bouquet of large-scale home repair and rehab, fresh-cut lumber, clean white PVC, the lye sniff of sackcrete, stinging sealants, sweet tar paper, and denatured spirits, the starchy zest of Tyvek, mingled with the ocean's sulphurous weft and Barnegat Bay's landward stink. It is the air of full-on disaster. To my nose, once practiced in these things, nothing smells of ruin quite as fragrantly as the first attempts at rescue. I noticed it first at the red light at Hooper Avenue, and then again when I gas up my Sonata at the Hess before heading to the bridge, Tom's River to Seacliff. Here in the rich gas station scents, a wintry breeze flitters my hair while my dollars spool along like a slot machine in the gathering December clouds. Breeze has set the silver whirligigs to spinning at the grandly reopened Bed Bath & Beyond at the Ocean County Mall. Only new bedding can keep us down. Across its acres of parking, a tenth full at 10 a.m., the Home Depot, Kremlin-like, but enigmatically still your friend in spite of all, has thrown its doors open wide and early. Customers trail out, balancing boxes of new toilet works, new motherboards, new wiring harnesses, shrink-wrapped hinge assemblies, hollow core doors, an entire front stoop teetering on a giant shopping cart. All is on its way to some still-standing domicile blottoed by the hurricane. 6 weeks past, but not lost from memory. Everyone still stunned here, quarrelsome, funked, put upon but resolute. All are committed to coming back. Out here under the Hess awning, someone's piped in loud sports talk radio for us customers, the Pat and Mike show from Magic 107 in Trenton. I was once among their faithful. They're old now. A booming voice, it's Mike, declares, "Wow-wee, Patrick, Coach Ben Zawicki cut loose quite a hurricane of F-bombs. I'm telling you, a real 30 seconds over Tokyo." "Let's listen to it again," Pat says through a speaker built deep inside the gas pump. Total disbelief, total. This was on ESPN. Another gravelly, exhausted voice, Coach Benzawiki's, takes up in a fury. Okay, let me tell you so-called F-bomb sports writers one F-bomb thing, okay, you F-bombs? When you can F-bomb coach a team of 9-year-old F-bomb grammar school girls, then I might give you one shred of F-bomb respect. Until then, you F-bombs, you can double F-bomb yourselves from here to F-bomb Sunday dinner. You heard it here first. The vacant-eyed, white-suited young Hess attendant who's pumping my gas hears nothing. He looks at me as if I wasn't here. That about says it all, I guess, Mike concedes. And then some, Pat concurs. Just drop your keys on the desk, Coach B. You're done. Take the F-bomb bus back to F-bomb Chillicothe. Un-F-bomb believable, he says. Let's take a break, you F-bomb. Me? You're the F-bomb. Ha, 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 ha. In recent weeks, I've begun compiling a personal inventory of words that, in my view, should no longer be usable in speech or any form. This in the belief that life's a matter of gradual subtraction aimed at a solider, more nearly perfect essence, after which all mentation goes and we head off to our own virtual Chillicothe's. A reserve of fewer, better words could help, I think, by setting an example for clearer thinking. It's not so different from moving to Prague and not learning the language, so that the English you end up speaking to make yourself understood bears a special responsibility to be clear, simple, and value-bearing. When you grow old, as I am, you pretty much live in the accumulations of life anyway. Not that much is happening, except on the medical front. Better to strip things down, and where better to start stripping than the words we choose to express our increasingly rare, increasingly vagrant thoughts. It would be challenging, for instance, for a native Czech speaker to fully appreciate the words poop or friggin' or the phrase we're pregnant or what's the takeaway, or for that matter awesome when it only means tolerable, or preemie or mentee or legacy or no problem when you really mean you're welcome. Likewise, soft landing, sibs, bond, hydrate when it just means drink, make art, share, reach out, noise used as a verb, and, apropos of Magic 107, F-bomb. Fuck to me is still pretty serviceable as a noun, verb, or adjective, with clear and distinct coloration to its already rich history. Language imitates the public riot, the poet said. And what's today's life like, if not a riot? Read this other little part here. Later yesterday morning, after I spoke to my friend on the phone, my wife Sally came downstairs to where I was eating my all-bran and stood staring, musing through the window into the backyard at the late autumn squirrel activity. I was pleased to be thinking nothing worth recording, not about anything, just breathing to the cadence of my chews. After a while of not speaking, she sat down across from me, holding a book I'd noticed her reading late into the night. Her light stayed on after I'd gone to sleep, then was switched off, then on again. It's not unusual for people our age. I read this shocking thing last night. She held the book she'd been engrossed by clutched to her yoga shirt. Her eyes were intent. She seemed worried. I couldn't make out the book's spine, but understood she meant to tell me about it. Tell me, I said. Well, she pursed her lips. Back in 1862, right when the Civil War was in full swing, the U.S. cavalry had time to put down an Indian revolt in Minnesota. Do you know about that? I did, I said. The Dakota Uprising. It's pretty famous. Okay, you know about it. I didn't. I know some things, I said, and stared down at a banana slice. Okay, but in December 1862, our government hanged 38 Sioux warriors on one big scaffold, just did it all at once. That's famous too, I said. Supposedly they'd massacred 800 white people, not that that's an excuse. Sally took in a breath and turned her head away in a manner to indicate a tear she didn't want seen might be wobbling out of her eyes. But do you know what they said? These words were nearly choked with throat-clogging emotion. What who said? I said. The Indians. They all began shouting out as they were standing on the gallows waiting to drop and never speak again. I didn't know, but I looked up to let her understand I realized this was important to her and that the next thing she said would be important to me. Possibly my spoon had paused on its upward arc toward my mouth. I may have shaken my head in amazement. They all shouted, "I'm here." They started calling that out in their Sioux language all around that awful contraption that was about to kill them. People who heard it said it was awe-inspiring, not awesome. No one ever forgot it. Then they hanged them, all of them, at one moment. "I'm here," as if that made it all right for them, made death tolerable and less awful. It gave them strength. Sally shook her head. Her tear of anguish for long ago, 1862, did not emerge. She held her book tight to her front and smiled at me mournfully across the glass-topped table where I've eaten possibly 3,000 breakfasts. "I just thought you'd want to know about that," she said. "I'm sorry to ruin your breakfast." "I'm glad to know about it, sweetheart," I said. "It didn't ruin my breakfast at all." "I'm here," she said, and seemed to embarrass herself. "So am I said. And with these words, she got up, came around the square table, kissed me once on my forehead, still embarrassed, then went away, carrying her book back to where she'd come from in our house. Thank you. This story, which I didn't say, is called "I'm Here," and these four stories are held together, which I didn't know when I wrote that story, and I didn't know when I wrote the second story, and I really only figured it out when I was probably midway through the last fourth. They're stories about bearing witness. In this story, Frank goes to see this guy who owned this house, which has been destroyed. In the next story, he's in his house in Haddam, New Jersey, and an African-American woman comes to visit him because she has lived in his house decades before and wants to come back and visit it. And in the third story, he goes to visit his former wife, Anne, who has Parkinson's disease and lives in an elder care facility very close to where he lives in Haddam. And in the fourth of the stories, he goes to see a friend who's dying, whom he used to know when he was young and was married. So it's odd, how books work. Books are kind of crucibles in which you very intensely put all the things you care about. And when you're really intensely heating up that crucible to make something out of it, out of all of there's a line of Ruskin's which says composition is the arrangement of unequal things. When you're trying to put these unequal things together and make something whole, even if the whole is four distinct stories, all kinds of things happen. If you're lucky, you have to get lucky. You have to get lucky to write a book at all to make it make sense. But all suddenly sort of ligatures between the things that didn't seem to have connections begin to emerge for you. I mean, you make them happen. They weren't there before. But in that hot crucible that is the making of a book, these sorts of connections begin to be possible to make. So that's why I came to understand that this was a book about bearing witness, and why I thought bearing witness was important. We all talk about bearing witness all the time for people. It's a kind of a stock phrase, certainly in the Christian community. But bearing witness actually has a value for all of us. When we bear witness, we give ourselves to certain kinds of situations. And in so doing, we affirm to the person to whom we are bearing witness that they are there and that they exist, and that our presence somehow confirms that, which is a value to people when they're in duress and under extreme situations, which is the case after, say, a hurricane. If there's a question, I'd be happy to try to answer it. Yes, ma'am. Please.
So, why do you think Frank came back to you in short stories instead of a novel? I'm just curious how that.
Well, he didn't make that choice. I made that choice.
You're the boss of Frank.
I'm the boss. I'm the author. I authorize everything. I was Christina and I, my wife and I, went down to the shore, and basically the place that this first story occurs, across the bridge from Tom's River, after the hurricane, we'd both, my wife and I, been very involved in the rehab and the rebuild after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, because we're some New Orleanians. And I had a lot of stored up hurricane experience from building houses and seeing the devastation of that hurricane. So we went down there. We were living in New York and went down to see it. And when we were driving back, I started hearing. I don't want to say hearing. I started thinking about writing lines down, and those lines were in Frank's voice. And I thought, well, gee, that's right, isn't it? Because this is his stomping grounds, at least fictively. And so I thought, well, I could write something in his voice about the aftermath of this hurricane, the aftermath that the news media in general would not have noticed, and so I could make up consequences. And I thought, oh, I don't want to write a novel. I thought I just finished Canada not very long before. I was tired, and I thought, well, I can do something that's not so arduous. And I like novellas. I've written novellas before, so I chose it because they were easy.
Thank you.
And they were really fun to write, and they were not writing in general is not hard. If you ever hear any novelists or story writers tell you how hard they work, it's not. If it was that hard at age 70, I would not be doing it. I can guarantee you that. But it was particularly sort of pleasurable to write these stories at this length.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, hi.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
My turn,
Excuse
I guess.
me.
I'm just curious, and I think you started to answer my question already. I come from a very small little town in northern Montana, Havre, Montana.
I know it
and
well. I
Great
lived
Falls.
20 miles from there in Chinook, Montana for 15
That's
years.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. But I'm curious because I've been almost spooked by your writing at how well you seem to know my hometown and towns around it. What is that process that you go through to sort of, figure out a place and incorporate it in your stories, whether it's Montana or New Jersey or wherever? How
Well,
long does it take? How do you do it?
well, Thoreau said a writer is a man who, having nothing to do, finds something to do. I don't have anything else to do. One thing. Two things. One kind of pseudo-mysterious and one just not mysterious at all. Catherine M. Porter says in her Paris Review interview that something that she writes gets started by feeling a commotion, that something that happens to her, something she sees, something she experiences, creates a kind of a commotion. We all have this experience, something that we experience that really kind of starts a flutter in us in a certain way. Novelists have something to do with that. Most people don't have something to do with that. They don't. We have a purpose for it. Neruda called it something kicking in my soul, and that's slightly exaggerated. But Montana has always, since I started living there in 1983, created a commotion in me. And what that commotion is I translate it into a sort of call for language. Give language to this commotion. Not that you're representing the commotion at all. You're just using the commotion as a reason to write something. And so I wrote all these stories set in Montana, including Canada, and up there, which there's a little scene, as you perhaps know, right in Havre.
I know.
The other part, once you submit to this commotion, the other part is just legwork, literally. I mean, I started writing about Great Falls in 1983 or 4, living in Missoula, never having been to Great Falls. I looked it up on the map. I saw where the mountains were. I saw where the plains were. I saw that the river ran north and then takes a big turn to the east. I sort of figured out what the coordinates and the lineaments were for that town. And so I wrote a couple of stories that were set there. But I think principally, and Havre, I think Havre is a town that actually for which this applies. I'm always happy when I see Great Falls on the page. If I write Great Falls, it can be spoken as an iamb, or it can be spoken as a trochee. I'm happy when I see the word Canada on the page. Canada is a dactyl. So all of these kind of non-cognitive qualities of language cause me to want to set things there. So if I want to see Havre on the page, then I have to set something in Havre. If I'm going to set something in Havre, then I better know what the main street's called and where the railroad goes by and how you go over the Milk River to get up to the Wild Rose. You know, I just have to figure that out. But these are things you can actually figure out. You don't have to be a writer to figure these things out. So it's partly kind of spooky how something affects you, and the rest is just kind of legwork.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, the only reason to have somebody like me standing up and talking to you is to prove how ordinary writers are. We're just people who don't have anything else to do, and who like to read, and who like books. And I'm not poo-pooing this, because I think it's true. When I was young and trying to make a writer out of myself, I had a couple of good teachers. I had E.L. Doctorow, and I had Oakley Hall, and I had Galway Connell. I wasn't very likely to be a writer, but they never discouraged me. They never said, you shouldn't be doing this. You can't do this. Don't try this. They just said, you just try. Do what you want to do. And so for me, it's important never to say anything in front of a bunch of people who are readers and who might at home be writing stories that would in any way make you think that to be a writer, you have to be a savant, or that you have to be somehow special. You don't. You just have to have nothing else to do. Yes, sir.
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
My question refers most specifically to the Sportswriter,
Yes,
where
sir.
we're first introduced to Frank Bascombe
Yes,
and
sir.
this condition of dreaminess or disattachment that he experiences. And I'm wondering if those descriptions were drawn from personal experience of your own, and if so, you consider that an affliction to be overcome, or as beneficial to the natural state of being a writer. And
Being
storyteller.
dreamy,
Yeah.
in that case.
Falling out of the real world for.
I started writing the Sportswriter in 1982, shortly after the death of my mother. And I knew I was affected by the death of my mother, but I couldn't say how. It may have been that I just thought that I was supposed to be affected. Couldn't have really particularized what it was. So when I started writing the Sportswriter, I thought, my Christina said to me, she's a wonderfully smart girl. She said, why don't you write a novel, she said, about somebody who's happy for a change. You've been writing novels about people who are not. So I thought, well, what can I do to make, if Tolstoy says happy families are all alike, which of course is not true, but what can I do to make a happy person be interesting? So I thought what I can do is I can make that person have something difficult to get over. And I didn't want to write about someone's mother dying, just because my mother had died. So I invented the notion of a child dying and a divorce. And I thought those were things that a person would really have to mount a supreme effort to get over if they happened more or less serially. And it's happened. And so I just tried to dream up how a person would feel if those things had happened, and being the age 39 that he was, and sort of let it be fueled a little bit by this unexpressed feelings about my mother's death, and dreaminess sort of was what I came up with. Sartre says that that writers are supposed to give names to things which are in all of our experience but unreflected. And by our naming them, they get brought from the realm of the unreflected to the realm of the reflected, and they are therefore become understandable and knowable. So I thought dreaminess was perhaps a condition that a lot of people who are entering their 40s would experience. So I thought that was possibly a use that could be made of my book, that it could identify a period of life that was otherwise not identified.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
This is a compare and contrast question.
Okay. Which do I have to do?
You've just written a great 4-novel series about a character who, in a sense, it's a state of the nation, a state of the suburban nation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Series. And I wondered if you, at any time, I'm sure you must have felt rabbit leaning over your shoulder. And so the compare and contrast is, how would you compare your approach with that of Updike, and what differences do you see?
Thank you. Well, I mean, a lot of things come into my brain. I was friends with John, and I talked to him about this once or twice. And it's undoubtedly true that if he hadn't written those books, and I've only read one of them. I've read Rabbit is Rich, which I really liked. I think it's just a great book. When the first Rabbit book came out, I wasn't interested in it, and then the second one came out, and I wasn't interested in it. But somebody put me on to Rabbit is Rich. Then I tried to read the last Rabbit, not the next, but the last full novel, and I got kind of bogged down in it. It didn't interest me very much. So, but this is not to denigrate the books. I just wasn't in the right frame of mind to like them at that time. I think if he hadn't written those connected books, even though I hadn't read them, I probably wouldn't have thought it was possible for the likes of me to write for 3, at the time, connected books. So, and I was able, when he was alive, to tell him that and thank him for that. Apart from that, the Rabbit books are told in the third person, and these books are told in the first person. And to me, those are two different moral realms. To talk about the life of a character from without, even though there are all kinds of, as we all know now, there are all kinds of strategies for shortening the distance between the narrator and the character. Inevitably, there are certain kinds of spaces which can be occupied. You could call them ironical spaces, though that I don't mean sarcastically ironical, just distance between modes of expression. So for me, Updike's use of Rabbit was much more as a specimen, and for me, writing about Frank is much more an endearment. So for me, I think they are alike insofar as they are connected books, but at their wellspring, they are really different kinds of books entirely, just as he was a very different kind of man from myself. But thank you for that. Yes, sir. Hi.
Hi. I'm a fan of all the Frank books, but I found this one the funniest.
Oh, good. I wanted it to be the first. It's about death, of course. Like the passage you read about the fall, also Frank's bad real estate advice that he gives to his Tea Party neighbor, and there were just many sections I laughed out loud. Thank you.
I don't think I did with the other Frank books as much as I enjoyed them. I was wondering, were you conscious of this? Is this like a stage of life thing that Frank goes through that he's just?
I probably was. I probably was conscious that this was a funnier book and that I was setting out to make it funny, given that it's about what it's about, chiefly, calamity. And end of times, end of days kind of concerns. I mean, there's the old comics injunction that if nothing's funny, nothing's serious. And there's also this great line of Henry James from his preface to what Maisie Knew, a little short novel. And he says that there are no themes so human as those out of the confusion of life that show the connection between bliss and bale, between the things that help and the things that hurt. So for me, to connect gravity and levity is essential in talking about important things. Books have to have consolations, and in this case, humor is one of this book's consolations, and I wanted it to be. I mean, frankly, I've laughed my way through writing these books. They make me laugh all the time. This one made me laugh a lot. And I knew why, because of the discrepancy between, bliss and bale. And so yes, I was aware of that, and I'm glad you thought that it was funny and it wasn't just me in my room. There's stories of Kafka in Prague. People would be under his window, and he'd be up there writing, those terrible grave books, and just laughing and laughing and laughing. So that was what I was doing. Yes, sir. Hi. Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
In the last novella, Eddie is talking to Frank, and he says, basically, how do you know when to end a novel?
Yeah.
How do you know when to end a novel? And in this case, how do you know when to end your involvement with Frank?
Yeah. Well, those are apt questions. I mean, you have to authorize the end of a novel. If you're me anyway, it can't just sort of peter out and wander off. The end of a novel is an opportunity, probably unlike no other opportunity in the writing of books, to have a say for the reader, to get the reader out of the book with something decidedly more than sure he came with. So when I start to write a book, I know where the book's going to end, at least spatially. I know what town it's going to end in. So I always know where I think a book's going to end. And then what I do when I get to the last movement of a book is that I go through what I've written, and I go through all my notes. And I say, is there anything more I need to say? And do I have anything in my notes that would be useful to say in behalf of what I think I still can say? So it's quite advertent to do that. So in other words, you just have to decide, and make that decisiveness be clear and useful to the reader, to let the reader out of the book. How do I know when to be done with Frank? I thought I was done with Frank at the end of The Lay of the Land, and then this came along, Parzard, really, and I just let myself do it because I thought it would be fun to do. It would be useful. I was going to write about something that I thought would be useful. A friend of mine and I were in a taxi in Washington last week, and he said, Ford, he said, what you really need to do is you need to write a book about Frank dying. I said, well, I can't really do that. I said, because it's a first-person narration. I don't want to go there. Sunset Boulevard. I don't want to do that. But he said, you need to write a book about set it at Valentine's Day, have him really be at death's door, and see what you could come up with. And I thought that was a pretty good idea. Mostly when people tell writers what they need to do, you don't need to do them. But underlying any thoughts about that I have is this. For me, anyway, nothing that I say extends to anybody else. You shouldn't write a book just because you can. Leavis's directive, which is that literature is the supreme means by which we undergo a renewal of sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. That has to be at the heart of why I set about writing another book. Can I think that this book will cause the reader to undergo a renewal of sensuous and emotional life? And do I have anything that I can imagine that would be a useful new awareness? I could write another book, but it may not contain those things. And if it didn't contain those things, probably it isn't worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you queued up there?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
I know you said you don't like people to tell writers what to do, but
I said no. I don't mind people telling me what to do, as long as they don't mind that if I don't do it.
All right. Well, I was here. I think it was maybe 2006 when you were here with Lay of the Land.
Lay of the Land.
And I had never heard your voice before, and it was strange because I'd been listening to a recording of Multitude of Sins for years. I loved it, and then I realized, it was you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've been. I'm sure you've been told this before. You're a great reader.
Thank you.
And I wondered if you had any plans to do any more audiobooks, because I think that would be.
No, I don't. Just because it's too hard. To do audiobooks is really the work of professionals, and people who can get things right the first or second time. But when you do an audiobook, you're in a studio with some very, very highly skilled people who have very high standards. And if you don't do it right, and I don't mean to say if you stumble over something or if you muff a line, of course that's not good, but if there's something that they don't like, then they make you do it again, and 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 that isn't any fun, really. I did all of them. I did all of A Multitude of Sins, and so it was onerous, and I don't think it helped the book particularly. Your voice gets tired, and the stories don't sort of do what you want them to do. If I were to read you one story in that would be the best I could do. But when I've done it over and over and over and over again, it kind of leaches out all of the vivacity of what I would hope to be there. So I probably won't do that. That said, if somebody paid me a hideous amount of money, I would of course do it immediately.
Well, thanks for the effort the first time.
Thank you very much.
Speaking of studios, several of my friends are screenwriters, and they're just obsessed with your work. We all go.
Where are they?
Yeah.
I'm not that hard to find. I know they're broke, aren't they?
No, No, they're not broke. You know better than that. If you'd speak to maybe your experience in that world, or maybe you have tried to turn some,
Yeah.
that would be interesting.
Thank you. I worked at Paramount in the 70s for a wonderful man named Richard Silbert, who was the head of production at Paramount. And I wrote one book, and he bought it and took it to Paramount and assigned to me, who knew nothing at all about writing screenplays. I mean, nothing. And he set me up in Raymond Chandler's office on the Paramount lot. And here I was, 32 years old, sitting there feeling like the king of the world. And I would write pages. And then I'd bring them down to Dick's office at 5:30 in the afternoon. We would sit there for an hour and a half and go over my pages. And I thought it was just one of the most splendid experiences I ever had in my life. Robert Towne was floating through, and Joan Didion was floating through, and all these wonderful screenwriters were flowing through. I didn't learn anything. I probably didn't learn anything. I at the end of it, nobody made my screenplay, and I thought I've sacrificed my entire, mentor, my whole young life as a novelist just to tumble to the money and write screenplays. So I quit. I just left and went back we were living in Vermont then. And over the course of years, people have optioned lots of these books. And I wrote a screenplay, which wasn't any good. And it got, unfortunately, produced. And with Sam Shepard and Valerie Prine and Dermot Mulroney, and it's called Bright Angel, and it was horrible. I mean, it was... And I thought, that was just an act of hubris on my part to do that. I thought, this is not really your line of work, so stay away. So when people come to me now and they want to option books, I'm always happy that they do, and then they option them for a while, and then they don't make it, and then I'm happy that they don't. But now my friend Gil Dennis, who is a screenwriter and lives on the West Coast, great pal of mine who wrote Walk the Line, for instance, a very, very accomplished screenwriter. He and I have written a screenplay for Canada, and but it's not very good. And it's just not very good. I mean, he's a great screenwriter, and I had full access to everything. We worked together, and we haven't really been able to make it work. This chap who did Calvary, this guy, John Patrick McDonough, optioned it, and I met him and didn't like him. And so I took it away from him. And I really don't care, to be perfectly honest with you. Again, if somebody came along and choked me with money, which HBO did for about 4 years, I was really happy. They would give me a lot of money, but it's just about money. From my standpoint, I don't care. If you option my book and buy it, you can make a musical out of it if you want to. I just want the money. That's really the truth, and it may make me seem mendacious, and maybe I am mendacious, but it's just not a line of work I have any facility for. And I know some really good people. Nobody's ever been mean to me. Nobody's ever cheated me. Nobody's ever lied to me that I knew about. It's all been good, but it just hasn't worked out. You've been very kind tonight. Thank you so much for coming.